The banality of evil, a phrase coined by Hannah Arendt to describe what took place during the Holocaust, the banality of evil. Seems to be taking place in many quarters in the West again in response to the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th. And perhaps the best illustration, even more than the professors who've said just absurd, vile things at Cornell, at Columbia, the moral equivocations by university presidents like at my alma mater, Mr. Schill, the Dickensian named Schill. But the instance I'm drawn to is this engineering student that was arrested at Cornell. The student.
Yeah, the Asian kid.
National Merit Scholar.
Mm-hmm.
Engineering at Cornell. Mentoring other engineering students. That's how bright this kid apparently is. And posting on social media, posting publicly threats to shoot up a dining hall that caters predominantly to kosher diets.
Yeah.
To slit the throat of any Jewish men he came across. I'm quoting him. Rape and kill all the Jew women before they birth more Jewish Hitlers.
Yeah, he also threatened to kill kids at the Jewish Living Center where about 30 students live on campus. And so they had to lock themselves in the library at one point in time.
His mom said he suffers from severe depression.
That's not depression. Okay.
Yeah, I need some help connecting those dots myself. This is a manifestation of depression. I'm not a psychologist, but that seems to not be a very persuasive explanation.
And it's so bad that we're just learning this morning that Cornell is canceling their classes tomorrow after anti-Semitic threats.
So how does that happen? How does this standout student at whatever high school he went to, National Merit Scholar, he goes to what is allegedly, and I dispute this, but allegedly one of the great institutions of higher education in the Western world, and he becomes that? How does that happen? Perhaps our next guest can provide some insight. She's Julia Steinberg. She's an intern at the Free Press. She's a junior at Stanford University. The Free Press is the outlet Barry Weiss started. And she recently penned a piece, Why My Generation Hates Jews. Julia Steinberg, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, Stanford. That's where they separated the Jewish students from the non-Jewish students in the classroom.
Yes, that was in a mandatory first-year class called college. And what happened that day is in two different sections, the lecturer, he wasn't a professor, thank God, but a lecturer hired by the university to teach this freshman class singled out Jewish and Israeli students, and at one point diminished the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. He said, oh, that's not that many. The colonialists have killed more. And I think that's fairly an extreme example of what's become commonplace at universities and even high schools in the United States, which is this obsession with the oppressor-oppressed ideology. And because my peers see that at least some Jews have white skin and that Jews are on average doing better than the median American, that we are oppressors. And therefore, any resistance against the oppressors is justified.
In your piece, you talked about your experience in the Great Books program at Stanford. Can you relate that to us?
Yeah, so I was in this program called SLE, Structured Liberal Education, and it's honestly an amazing program in some ways. You start out reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Odyssey, the Republic, and it's a tour de force of Western intellectual history. However, in the last quarter, in spring quarter, it's works of the last 200 years. It's a lot easier for 19-year-olds to disagree about Plato than it is for 19-year-olds to disagree about Marx, or in my case, Frantz Fanon, who is one of the authors we read. And in the Free Press, I think yesterday, we published a piece by Eli Lake calling him the prophet of decolonization.
Mm-hmm.
And Frantz Fanon, in his works, explicitly supports the idea of violence against a colonial regime under any circumstances. And in my discussion section, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, I brought issue to this, like having no idea what would happen on October 7th, saying, I think it's a bad idea to blanket approve violence against colonialists or colonizers. And a lot of people in my section disagreed with me. And I think back to that conversation, and I wonder if any of them have changed their mind. And I was talking to a freshman who signed up to be in that program, who lived in that residence hall that's dedicated to the program. And he told me that before the school year even started, he dropped out of the program because he was afraid, as a conservative or as someone who wasn't really an orthodox leftist, he wouldn't be able to talk about his opinions in the way that he really wanted to.
Right, and that's Stanford University, another allegedly premier institution of higher education. And so, what is campus life like for you there right now? Yeah.
Do you feel safe?
Definitely hostile. I think a lot of people are on edge. White Plaza, which is one of the main centers for student gathering on campus, there are two sort of like warring demonstrations. There's first the pro-Palestine sit-in. There have been students at this little tent city for, I would say, like 10 days now. It's a good amount of time.
You have a Students for Justice, and you have a Students in Justice for Palestine chapter there?
I believe so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think everyone who's at the sit-in is affiliated with that. You have a lot of people who sort of just stop by for a night.
Yeah, right.
But there are people who are really devoted to the cause. So that's one corner of White Plaza. And then in another corner of White Plaza, one of the Jewish communities on campus has set up a Shabbat table mourning the over 230 people kidnapped by Hamas, and with a bunch of Israeli flags near it. So I feel like that encapsulates the like warring environment on campus. I think in this last week, it's definitely cooled down. But I remember the week after October 7th, I was just so frustrated with a lot of my classmates that like I barely left my room. My friends would bring me food because I didn't want to have to go to a dining hall and have the experience of the person in front of me in line at the salad hall or in front of the salad station posted pro-Hamas propaganda on their Instagram stories, which was in fact the case for dozens of my classmates, people I used to say hi to on my way to class.
Well,
luckily, none of my close friends feel that way.
No, tell us what happened during your freshman and sophomore years. You lived in a dorm that served kosher food, and some incidents happened.
Yeah, so the same dorm that was home to the Great Books program also has the kosher dining hall on campus. And I don't keep kosher, but a lot of my Jewish friends do. And it's the kosher dining hall on campus because it's the closest proximity to the Hillel, the Jewish center on campus. And during my sophomore year, I was still in that dorm. A Jewish student in my dorm had a whiteboard on his door vandalized with a portrait of Hitler and swastikas. And they never found out who did that attack. And for the rest of the year, I was always on edge as a Jewish student. And later that year, last spring, I was walking to class. It was a beautiful spring day, 75 and sunny. And I heard these two girls discussing a third girl. They said about her, oh, she's Jewish, but she's politically good. implying that Jews were generally politically bad. And I guess I would fall into that category as a Zionist, but also someone who's not a leftist. And hearing that just really frustrated me, that there's this expectation that Jews had to disavow their homeland to be quote unquote politically good, but there's also this expectation that Jews are an oppressor, or Jews are not compatible with this social justice ideology that's so prevalent on college campuses.
I mean, do you have any comment on that Cornell student and the things that he posted? And I mean, do those things, does number one, whatever happened to him, or the road that he chose to go down to believe these things and to say these things, any insight on that? Do you see any sort of essentially radicalization instances? Number one, and then number two, I mean, do you see comments like the comments he made, or comments adjacent to the kind of comments he made at Stanford?
What the student did, Patrick Dye, was absolutely disgusting, and I'm glad that he's apprehended. And I have Jewish friends at Cornell, and I can't imagine how afraid they felt for these past few days. I thankfully haven't seen anything really remotely like that at Stanford. And I think that, as we saw after over 30 student groups at Harvard signed a statement sort of blaming Israel on the massacres that happened and implicitly condoning Hamas, and once the letter was publicized, many of these student groups disavowed themselves from this. I think it's a PR game for a lot of Stanford students. Even if they may harbor these thoughts, they're smart enough to know that their future employers are not going to hire them.
How did
like this.
How did the school? How has the school responded? The administration, professors, how are they responding? How did they respond to the professor who separated Jewish students from non-Jewish students and said, as you said, that 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust wasn't that big a deal?
Yeah. So with that lecturer, he has been suspended. He's not teaching for the rest of the quarter. I doubt he's going to be able to teach again, at least at Stanford, which is very good. But I would say overall the university's response has been fairly lackluster. They've said publicly that they're reaching out to Jewish communities, Jewish students that have been impacted by it, Israeli students, especially those who have been subject to harassment campaigns on social media, and that's not happened. And there is currently an open letter that's going around signed by a lot of prominent alumni, but also students as well. I signed this letter that talks about how the university hasn't properly addressed anti-Semitism. And I think that we've seen this sort of most blatantly from the highest levels of the administration in the response that was given. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, after the war in Ukraine started, it took less than a day, I think, for university responses to be administered, condemning sort of both political situations. And even on things about climate change, they're more than happy to jump to a swift condemnation of the fossil fuel industry or things like this. But when it comes to October 7th, I think they waited until like Wednesday or Thursday of the week after that to issue a statement which condemns terrorism broadly, but they didn't delve into the specific attack. They said we condemn what happened on October 7th as a larger condemnation of terrorism, but they didn't single out this sort of anti-Semitic terror act that did occur. And from what I've heard, Israeli students on campus especially have not been getting really any support. I have a friend who last year was an RA in a freshman dorm and a resident assistant, and one of her residents was Israeli, and he was just called back to serve in the IDF, and she had no idea. And it's sort of crazy to me that the university wouldn't really facilitate residential help for Israeli students who are being called back to serve for their country, or that status isn't really cared about generally.
Mm-hmm. Julia Steinberg is an intern at the Free Press. She's also a junior at Stanford. Her piece at the Free Press, Why My Generation Hates Jews. You want to give that a read. Julia Steinberg, thanks so much for joining us, and good luck at school and in your burgeoning journalism career, or commentating career.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yep, you too. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Feel like you're trying to push a boulder uphill wearing skates? If you run or manage a local business today,